Hello guys and welcome again to my channel. So this is the time where I will post these journal entries. Actually, this journal entries has already been posted to the ledger. Here is our ledger. And we're going to the next step, which is the preparation of the unadjusted trial balance. That's step 4 of the accounting cycle. As well as we're going to have the step 5, which is the completion of worksheet. Okay? So I am going to merge these two steps because the unadjusted trial balance is actually preparation of the unadjusted trial balance. The unadjusted trial balance is actually the first part, or it's included in the worksheet. Okay? And of course, when we talk about unadjusted trial balance, that is pretty straightforward. Okay? Now, actually, to be honest, I have already taped this episode using a blue mark pen. However, it is not really readable to you as the viewer. So I decided to retape it. Okay? So, as you can see, we have RT accounts here. We have the balances, those that were enclosed in squares for the debits, and those that are enclosed in circles when we talk about the credits. Okay? Now, what do we do about this? First off, I would like you to look at the cash. There are some explanations to cash, unlike the other T accounts. But don't worry, this is just made so that on your cash flow statement later on, which is in the preparation of financial statements, it will be easier to make a cash flow statement because of these explanations. Okay? Now, let's go to making of the unadjusted trial balance. So, what will you do? First, of course, you have to list the accounts here. And for example, we have the cash. Let's erase it. Where's the eraser? Yeah. Yep. So let's list. Let's list the... Oh no. Maybe you can't see. It was destroyed. Okay. Alright. Let's have the account titles. We have the cash. We have the prepaid rent. But then again, aside from the accounts here in the T accounts, if you remembered, we did not yet process the adjusting journal entries here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. However, we are using some account titles here, so we have to prepare for them also. So, for example, aside from the cash right there, instead of going immediately to the prepaid rent, we go first with the accounts receivable. I guess we need to economize space, we have account titles, and then we put cash, and we put the accounts receivable. So we're going to do this until all the accounts that were used in the ledger as well as on the adjusting entries will be in here. So the next step should be you have to put the balances. However, you have to classify them as either debit or credit. Like for example, if we talk about cash, of course, the balance is 117,950. You have to put it on the debit. Okay? And then for now, the accounts receivable is still 0. Debit, credit. I have to write it above so that it's as if I'm tall. Okay? So, the accounts receivable is right there. And we don't have any other assets here. So, let's proceed with the prepaid rent. So, basically, The unadjusted trial balance is just the listing of the balances that are found in the ledger. So prepaid rent is on the debit side. We have 15,000. And of course, next would be the supplies. The supplies is 20,000. Let's take a look at again the adjustments. If we have other assets, other current assets, because that's the first one that you're going to list, there's none. Yeah, there's none. So we proceed with the non-current assets, which is the office equipment. The office equipment is 30,000. Do we have accumulated depreciation? Yes, we have an accumulated depreciation attached to the office equipment. So again, the accumulated depreciation is a contra asset. So whenever there is a depreciation, we are not going to deduct immediately the office equipment because we have to preserve the original cost, right? So what are we doing is that we are crediting it instead of office equipment, we are crediting it with the contra asset accumulated depreciation. So since it is a contra asset, it has a credit balance 983.33. Later in the adjustments. For now, we are still having the unadjusted trial balance. So that is still zero because there are no balances yet here in our T accounts. Okay? Now, don't worry even if there is a contra asset. The accumulated depreciation office equipment will still be deducted if you're going to be asked what is really the book value of the office equipment. Your answer will be historical cost or the original cost, which is 30,000. And later on, if there is already an accumulated depreciation, you have to deduct it. Okay? In effect, the substance is not affected. The equipment still decreases its value because of depreciation. Okay? So, that's accumulated depreciation. And also, at this point, I would like to introduce you already to the bad debts expense or doubtful accounts expense or allowance for doubtful accounts. Let's have allowance for doubtful of accounts. That is a contra asset of the receivable. So if you have a receivable of 100,000 and you are doubting, for example, that 20,000 will not be collected, that will be stored in the allowance for doubtful accounts account. It will not be deducted immediately to the accounts receivable. So of course, if you are doubting here in accounting, 100,000, you are doubting the collection of the 20,000, supposedly, you have to credit or decrease the accounts receivable immediately. 100 minus 20, 80. The 80,000 is the only ones that is sure to be collected. But we're not doing that here in the accounting. You just credit it instead of accounts receivable or decrease it in the accounts receivable. You put it in the allowance for doubtful accounts. Okay? So the allowance for doubtful accounts has a credit balance also as a contra asset of accounts receivable similar to accumulated depreciation office equipment. So, of course, the partner of that one is an expense. The same with depreciation expense. Okay? That is what do we call as doubtful accounts expense or bad debts expense depending on the chart of accounts of the company. Okay? So, that's contra asset. Of course, in the higher accounting, you will also have that method that I'm talking about, the using of the allowance for doubtful accounts. That is what do we call as allowance method. Okay? You can also choose direct write-off method wherein there is no allowance for doubtful accounts account title. Instead, you write it off directly with the accounts receivable. So 100,000, That is your accounts receivable. You are doubting the 20,000, you deduct it immediately to the from the accounts receivable, and it will become 80. That is what we call as direct write-off. Okay? So that's it for the contra assets. So I have introduced again the allowance for doubtful accounts and the accumulated depreciation. Okay? Okay. Now, next, we have, aside from the office equipment, I guess there are no other assets already. So let's go to liabilities. So the liabilities is composed of accounts payable. The accounts payable has a balance of 10,000, but that is on the credit side. So you have to put that here. And then we have unearned revenue. So these are liabilities that are considered current liabilities. 80,000. I don't think we have other liabilities. So those are current liabilities. Supposedly, the next would be the non-current liabilities. And I guess we don't have any in our illustrative example. So next would be the capital. Okay? So baby G capital. And let me reiterate before we put the capital, the list of accounts has a, what do we call this? A pattern. First, you have to put the assets. So what is the first? The current assets, followed by the non-current assets. And after the assets, you go to the liabilities. You first start with the current liabilities and then the non-current liabilities. And then next would be the capital, including the withdrawal, and then the revenues, and then the expenses. Okay? So we are now on the capital. The next thing that we should do is to put the baby J withdrawals. The baby G withdrawals is 25,000. And then that's it. Now you go to the expenses. I don't think we have our expenses. Do we have our expenses already? Yeah, we have our regulatory expenses. Where did we put the regulatory expenses? Supposedly, there is a regulatory expense here. Regulatory expenses, credit cash. Where's the regulatory expenses? Payment for permits. So, credit that one, and then, I guess we did not put regulatory expenses. Two, three. Did I, did I forget something? I guess I did. So, suppose, or I erased something. Because supposedly, there should be a regulatory expense here, which is two, three. And also, there should be, where is it? There should be a utilities expense, I guess. Okay, let's put utilities expense. And let me ask for a little bit of time so that I could confirm that that is really the balance. The 230,000 is really the balance for the debits. So the utilities expense is 19,750. you have the withdrawals of 25,000, of course. So let me confirm, okay? So let's use, somebody erased something or I forgot to write. So let's check. So let's start with 117,950 for cash, and then plus 15,000 for prepaid rent, plus 20,000 for supplies, plus 30,000 for office equipment, and then plus 19,750 for the utilities expense, plus 23 for the regulatory expenses, and plus 25,000 for the BBG withdrawals. Yeah, it's 230,000. So I just forgot to put the regulatory expenses and the utilities expense. So let's have that. But before we do the expenses, we have the revenues. The revenues is service revenues is 40,000. And let's put on the expenses. However, again, we have to put also the expenses on the adjustments because later on, when we complete the working worksheet, these entries will play a very important part. Okay? This will play a very important part later on. Again, we are still in the unadjusted trial balance, so the adjustments are not yet considered, but later on, in the next columns of the worksheet, you will have to put the adjustments. Okay? So what are the expenses? Of course, we'll start with the expenses that are in the T accounts already, regulatory expenses with a debit balance of 23. And then we have utilities expense of 19,750. And then the other expenses, although the amounts are still zero, we'll have to put it right here. So we have rent, expense, still again, it's still zero. And we have supplies expense, supplies expense, supplies expense is still zero. And we have depreciation expense, depreciation expense, which is still zero. And then we have salaries expense. I guess that's the last one. Salaries expense, which is still zero. So if we try to check 117,950 plus 15,000 plus 20,000 plus 30,000 plus 25,000 plus 23 plus 19,750, that's 230,000 confirmed. So if you're going to put some totals, normally, you just have to double rule. And then on the credit side, you have 10,000 plus 80,000 plus 100,000 plus 40,000. You have 230,000. So that's it for step 4. It's just a list of the balances of the T accounts after putting on or posting the general journal entries. Again, these balances are without adjustments yet. Okay? That is why we're talking about unadjusted trial balance. Okay? Now, before we go to the completion of the worksheet, I would like to tell you that this style of posting wherein I group the debits and the credits, I'm doing this in the posting so that it will be arranged, the debits and the credits, and I could total the total debits and the total credits before going to the unadjusted trial balance preparation. So that if ever this is already balanced, I am confident that the unadjusted trial balance will be balanced also. Okay? Now, trial balances in general is just a trial to balance the debits and the credits. It could detect some errors in posting, but sometimes it cannot. Okay? So what are the errors that could be detected by using the trial balance? First off, for example, if you have posted what's supposed to be is debit in the cash, for example, you have posted it in the credit. And then, for example, the investment from the owner, it should be debit cash and then credit PBG capital. So what you did, for example, as an error, you have credited it in cash and you have also credited it in the capital. So only one of the entries, the debit, has been misplaced. It should be debited, it has been credited, for example. The other one is correct. It will be checked or it could be detected by the trial balance. Why? Because the credits will become greater, okay, than the debit. Imagine if ever the 100,000 is not here, so the balance here will be 17,950. What will be considered here is 17,950 only, okay? And no, no, no. If this 100,000 is not here and it will be put here, this will become negative, okay? So the difference between the debits and the credits will be too far. So if the error is 100,000 because of misposting, then the difference of the debits and the credits will be 200,000. Because instead of adding the 100,000, you have deducted it. Okay? Okay? It's not just misplacing. First off, if this is not here, so this will become 120,000 only. And if this is posted here, of course, this will become bigger. Okay? This became smaller and this became bigger. Okay? The error has been amplified 2 times. Okay? So it will be detected using the trial balance. And what do you do in order to detect it? In order to find out what is really the error, you have to get first the difference. Okay? After getting the difference, you divide it by 2. And for example, if the error is really the 100,000 and the difference is 200,000 divided by 2, 100,000, you look at the transactions, like in the journal or in the original source of transactions, really, and you find the 100,000. If you can't find the 100,000, then that might be the error. Okay? So that's the first step. What are the other things that could be detected by the trial balance? Of course, the trial balance will be able to detect some slide and transposition errors. What is that slide and transposition errors? So, when we talk about slide means your decimal place is misplaced. Like for example, instead of saying 100,000, that one, you have considered in your computation only 10,000. The decimal point should have been here, but it was put here. So that's slide. The decimal has been misplaced. Okay? So what do you do if ever it's a thing? Like for example, um, you have considered the accounts payable to be 1,000 instead of 10,000. So this is the correct one. You consider 1,000 only because of the error slide. What will happen? So this will become Instead of 230, it will become 221,000 because the difference between 10,000 and the 1,000 is 9. So that will become 221,000. And how do you check it? Again, first step is always going for the difference, checking, um, comparing the debits and the credits, and you will be able to get the difference. Next is, the difference is 9,000. Okay? So step 1 is getting the difference. Second step, I personally do divided by 2. Because if I divide that 9,000 divided by 2, it will be 4,500, and I look at the transactions if ever there are transactions that are 4,500. Because maybe that is the wrong one. Okay? Maybe there is a misposting that happened. Okay? Now, if I am not successful like this one, we already know the error, of course. So, 9,000 divided by 2, 4,500. There are no transactions related to 4,500. Then you go to divided by 9. Okay? So, after dividing it, the difference, after dividing the difference by 2 and you don't get any transaction related to that answer, then you go to divided by 9 because it might be slide. Okay? So, how do you determine? Again, divided by 9. If the answer is a whole number, there are no decimals, that might be a slide. Okay? So, if it is a slide, you have to check the amounts. You already know where to focus. Okay? It's either slide. Okay? Or transposition error. So let's talk about transposition error because those are the two possible reasons why your trial balance is unbalanced. It's either slide or transposition error. The transposition error is just like this. For example, this 19,750. You have written it as 17,950. That is a slide. Okay? The misplacing of numbers or the rumble of numbers. Okay? So instead of 19,750, it became 17,950. That's a transposition error. So if that happens, this is still true. You get the difference, you divide it by 9, and then if the answer is with no decimal, whole number, then that would mean the error might be slide or transposition error. Okay? And having that knowledge makes a lot of difference by tracing. Okay? Because if ever you don't know if it is a slide or transposition error or misposting, you will have to check one by one on your journal entries from the transactions without any clue. Okay? But if you know the divided by 2 and the divided by 9, and there are signs, you'll be able to narrow down your search for the error. Okay? But then again, the trial balance will not be able to check any journal entries that were not really posted here. Like for example, this transaction C, that was eliminated in the posting. Of course, the trial balance will still be balanced because what was missing is a complete journal entry, complete debit and credit. Okay? And next, if ever in the journal you would erase a complete entry like this transaction D, the trial balance will still be balanced and you will not detect any error. Okay? So that's it for the trial balance. Now let's move forward to the making of the worksheet. So the making of the worksheet is actually, it's composed of 10 columns. To be strict about it, it's 12 columns. Wherein the first column would be the account number that is corresponding to these account titles, and then the account titles, and then the 10 columns which are numbers already. But in this particular video, I'm going to have the 10 columns only. We're going to focus only on the amounts. We will not include already the account titles and the account numbers. Okay? So the first two columns of the worksheet is actually the unadjusted trial balance. So that's what you're seeing here. How about the second columns? So in order, the third and the fourth columns. The third and the fourth columns. Let me erase this first, okay? So that we can complete the worksheet. So this is how the teaching should be, I guess, for me. It's in my opinion. This is how the teaching of basic accounting should be. So if you're tired with your teachers who are not doing anything like this, who are not really writing, just sitting there and then give you instructions and activities, you should meet me. As a segue, I'm really teaching in a school. Okay? Now, let me check if it's still recording. Actually, the third and fourth columns is for the adjustments. Still, you have to put the debit and the credit. That's it. So on the adjustments, you focus on these adjustments. Why? Because the fifth and the sixth is actually the adjusted trial balance. So in order to have the adjusted trial balance, the unadjusted trial balance and the adjustments that you have made should be merged. Okay? So for example, we have the adjustment number one, the rent expense. You have to put here rent expense. You're just actually posting. You have 6,000. And then credit prepaid rent, 6,000. That's it. You just post the adjustments, everything. So I guess I've proven my point that when you are making journal entries, you should already include immediately the adjusting journal entries. Because if this is already prepared, the journal entries and the adjustments, the next steps will just be procedural. Okay? Procedural. And you just have to be careful, okay, on those procedures. So we have the transaction one or adjustment number one. Let's go to adjustment number two. We have the supplies expense. The supplies expense is actually 16,500. And then credit supplies, 16,500. That's it. Let's go to depreciation expense. Depreciation expense is 983.33. And then the accumulated depreciation is the partner, 983.33. Let's go to number 4. Salaries expense, salaries payable. Since we have already prepared here, salaries expense. How much is the salaries expense? 3,000. Oh no, we have not prepared for salaries payable. So I guess it would be proper to insert that here. First off, let's relocate the accounts payable a little above. Accounts payable. $10,000. Let's insert salaries payable. Salaries payable is 3,000. Oh no, not here. Because supposedly it's still 0 here. So you have to credit here. 3,000. Yeah, it's balanced. And then we have accounts receivable, 5,000. We have already prepared something here. So you just have to put the accounts receivable. And then we have the service revenues. Service revenues is right here. 5,000. Okay? Now, next, we have the number 6. The unearned revenue is 16,000. It will be debited. And then, it's a credit again to the service revenues. And since we have already 5,000 on the service revenues, because of this adjustment number 5, we just have to combine 16,000 plus 5,000. We have 21,000. So, this is already again 5,000 plus 16,000. So that what we are posting will become neatly posted. Okay? Now, since we have already posted all of the adjustments, we just have to add 5,000 plus 16,000 plus 6,000 plus 16,500 plus 983.33 plus 3,000, and you will get 47,483.33. And supposedly, it should be balanced on the credit because the adjustments, as a debit and a credit also, so we're expecting that this will also be the same, 47,483.33. So 6,000 plus 16,500 plus 983.33 plus 3,000 plus 21,000, 47,483.33. That's it. Now, let's go to the fifth and sixth to economize time. So, in the fifth and sixth, what you will do is just, for example, this cash, since there are no adjustments related to it, you just copy it. That's the first rule. You just have to copy. If ever there are no adjustments related to cash. Okay? So, if it is debit right there, you copy that on the debit also here. Now, let's talk about accounts receivable. This is the next one. On the unadjusted trial balance, there is no balance, but in the adjustment, there is a debit balance. You just copy that also. 5,000. That's the second rule. There are only four rules here. So, first rule, if in the unadjusted trial balance, there is a balance, and then there are no corresponding adjustments, you just copy it. Okay? The second one, if in the adjustments, there is a balance, but there are no unadjusted balances in the unadjusted trial balances, you just copy that also. The third one will be this one, wherein the unadjusted trial balance, there is a debit balance of 15,000. On the adjustments, there is an opposite balance, 6,000 credit. Again, in here, debit, in here, credit. So what do? You get the difference because you have to deduct. Like for example, 15,000 minus 6,000, that is 9,000. And you have to put it on the bigger amount. So we have to put the difference on the debit. It's because 15,000 is greater than the 6,000. That's the third one. Okay? So if there is a balance on the unadjusted trial balance at debit, and on the adjustments, there is also an amount corresponding to that account title, but in the opposite side, on the credit, you have to get the difference, okay? And the difference should be posted on the adjusted trial balance in the bigger amount, okay? That is also true if ever the unadjusted trial balance is a credit balance and on the adjustment, there is a debit balance. You have to get the difference and put the difference in the side wherein the debit or credit, which is greater. Okay? I don't know, but you get the point. Okay? That's the third rule. Now, it's also applicable here in the supplies, 20,000 debit, and then there is a credit of 16,500. So this is 35. Again, you put it on the debit because 20,000 is greater than 16,500. And then we have the office equipment. You just copy. And then you have 983.33. You just copy. This is rule number 2. And then you just have to copy the 10,000 here. And then you just have to copy again. The salaries payable is on the adjustment. This is rule number 1, by the way. This is rule number 2. There is an amount in the adjustment. There are no amounts in the unadjusted trial balance. Well, this one, there is an amount in the unadjusted trial balance. There are no adjustments. Now, the last rule might be, and this is still the third rule, credit 80,000, debit 16,000. That means what will win is the credit. So, 80 minus 16,000, you have 64,000. And you have to copy this, rule number 1. And you have to copy also this, still rule number 1, but you put it on the debit because it's debit right there. This is the rule number 4. If there is a credit here and on the adjustment there is also a credit, that means the sides balance, then you have to get the sum instead of the difference. Okay? You only get the difference if ever on the unadjusted trial balance there is a debit side, and on the adjustment you have the credit side. Or in the unadjusted trial balance you have the credit side, on the adjustment you have the debit. So there are opposing sides. Okay? In here, credit and then credit you have to add. Okay? So that would be 61,000. You have to put it right here, 61,000. And then the regulatory expenses, you have to forward it, copy it. Rule number 1. And then 19,750. And then rule number 2. You just copy everything. And then the 3,000. That's it. And supposedly this should balance. So if you have been very careful in forwarding amounts, in getting the difference, in getting the sum, this should balance. Plus 23, plus 19,750, plus 6,000, plus 16,500, plus 983.33, plus 3,000. Again, what I did is double check 117,950 in the adjusted trial balance, plus 5,000, plus 9,000, plus 3,500, plus 30,000, yeah, plus 25,000, plus 23, plus 19,750, plus 6,000, plus 16,500, plus 983.33, plus 3,000, and you will get 238 983.33. Let's check if that is also true with the credit. So 983.33 plus 10,000 plus 3,000 plus 64,000 plus 100,000, yeah, plus 61,000. 238, 238, 983.33. So it's still balanced. Okay? Now let's go to the 7th and the 8th. The 7th and the 8th is just the forwarding of amounts, the income and the expense amounts. So actually this is for the income statement, but the correct term for now is the statement of comprehensive income. So before you go to that, you have to determine what are the account titles that are considered as income statement or statement of comprehensive accounts. Statement of comprehensive income accounts. Okay? So what are these? These are the service revenues, regulatory expenses, utilities expense, rent expense, and etc. Why? Because on the 7th and the 8th, you have to compute for the net income already. So the, what do you call this? The main amounts that will be put here is the revenues. And we deduct the expenses and we'll get the net income. Okay? Now, the beauty of organizing your accounts from assets and then liabilities and then capital and then income and expenses, it's just you'll have these. They are actually arranged from here to below. Unlike other people who are making a worksheet not following the organized uh, chronological order, assets to expenses, they will have a hard time forwarding the amounts of the income and the expenses to the 7th and the 8th. Okay? So, what do you do again? You just have to forward. For example, since this is credit, you have to forward it on the credit. And then you put the 2,3 here, the 19,750, the 6,000, the 16,500, the 983.33, and then the 3,000. And you get the balance. Of course, you are not going to expect that this will be balanced, of course. Why? It's because you have only forwarded the partial numbers, the income and the expenses. The others, you did not forward it to the 7th and the 8th. Okay? Actually, it will not be balanced, and whatever is the difference between the debits and the credits will dictate if ever you will have a net income or a net loss. Like for example, we have here the credit. The total credit is 61,000. How about the debits or the expenses? 2,3 plus 19,750 plus 6,000 plus 16,500 plus 983.33 plus 3,000. You have 48,533.33. And I guess the owners will be happy with this one because the revenues, the service revenues, is higher than the expenses. Okay? That's what it meant. So what do you do next? You get the difference so that we can highlight the net income. So 61,000 minus 48,533.33, and we will have an income of 12,466.67. You have to add it to the lower totals and you will get the same 61,000 right here and 61,000 right here. So it's still balanced in the end. However, let me tell you, it was not really balanced at first. Okay? So, In this case, you have to remember that on the income statement columns, if the debit side is lacking, just like this one, then that would be a net income on the part of the company. But if it is in the opposite, like for example, this one is greater than this one, of course, the addition that you're going to make is in the side on the credit. That is a net loss. Okay? So, if debits are lacking, net income. If the credits are lacking, that's net loss. Okay? Now, let's go to the last part. And since we need space, okay, we just have to erase the numbers. The last two are for the statement of financial position or balance sheet. Statement of financial position or the balance sheet or the permanent accounts. In here, the income statement, the statement of comprehensive income, these are considered as temporary accounts, and actually, this will all be zero at the end of the year, as well as this one. It will be summarized to a net income of 12,466.67. That is already the summary of revenues minus expenses. And this one will also be zeroed out because it will be close to the capital account of BBG. Because again, any net income is, what do we call that? It's a benefit that must be enjoyed by the owners as the ultimate risk takers. Okay? So that is why they are considered as temporary accounts only, because they will be zeroed out and they will be added in the BBG capital later on if ever we're talking about net income, just like this one. And if it is a net loss, it will be deducted to BBG capital. Okay? So that's the reason they are considered as temporary accounts. Again, let me repeat that. They're considered temporary accounts because they will be zeroed out at the end of the year. And actually, they will be first be summarized to net income, but later on, the net income and the net loss will be combined with the BBG capital account or the capital account. Okay? So, the accounts that were not put on the 7th and the 8th are considered as statement of financial position accounts or permanent accounts because they will not be closed. Their balances will just be modified over time. Like for example, when we talk about cash, we have now 117,950, but if ever there are cash inflows in the future, it will just be modified. Like there is a cash inflow of 100,000, so it will become 217,950. It is actually not closed. It will just be modified based on the transactions. Okay? So 117,950. And then 5,000, and then 9,000. As long as it was not forwarded here, you have to forward it here. So supplies, you have 35. Office equipment, you have here 30,000, and we have 983.33, and you have 10,000, and you have 3,000, you have 64,000, you have 100,000, and then you have 25,000 here. Actually, that is already the last one. And of course, you have to add them all up. However, the same with the 7th and the 8th, you don't actually expect that this will be balanced. Like for example, on the debit, we have 117 plus 5,000 plus 9,000 plus 35 plus 30,000 plus 25,000. You will have 190,450. Let me check that again. Double check. 179.50 plus 5,000 plus 9,000 plus 3,500 plus 30,000 plus 25,000. That's it. 194.50. We have 983 plus 10,000 plus 3,000 plus 64,000 plus 100,000. You'll get 177,983.33. So it's not balanced, right? However, as you can see, the lower amount is on the credit side. So that is actually the case if ever you're making a worksheet. So if the balancing figure here is on the debit, of course, the balancing figure on the last two columns will be on the credit side. They are opposite. And supposedly, if we are correct, this 12,466.67 shall be copied only from here. And we should be getting 194.50 already. Let's check if ever 177,983.33 plus 12,466.67. I'm sorry for my voice. Yeah, we have 194.50. So, if the ones lacking on the 7th and the 8th is the debit side, so the balancing figure is on the debit side, that is a net income. And if ever, on the last two columns, if ever, the ones that is lacking is on the credit side, that is net income. Actually, this is only 177,983.33 versus 194.50 because it's lacking the net income. Okay? The BBG capital here, 100,000, is only considering the investments from the owners. But if you merge the net income, they should have been balanced. Okay? So if the lacking is in the 7th and 8th is the debit, as well as the lacking on the 9th and 10th is on the credit side, that is a net income. If the lacking in the 7th and 8th is on the credit side, and the lacking on the statement of financial position columns is on the debit side, then that is a net loss. Okay? So that's the face of your worksheet. Okay? When making a worksheet, it's like that. Okay? So I'll not keep you for long. This is it. This is the end of this video, step 4, unadjusted trial balance and the preparation of worksheet. And I hope you learned and you can play and replay this. And again, if you are tired of those teachers who are not really teaching, making efforts, and they are just sitting there reading some books with, what do you call this? Reading some books with emotions, something like that. Then you could go here in my YouTube channel or meet me in person. I'm having my classes on St. Paul University, Surigao. And if you are interested from zero to being a hero accountant, you should watch these videos in this playlist, Zero to Hero, Accounting Zero to Accounting Hero. So I'll be posting some lessons here, and I hope this helped. And if you learned, please click like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And see you on my next videos. Bye bye. Thank you.